Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are pushing past the official stories, past all the headlines you've been seeing. We're going to ignore them. And instead, we're going straight to the forensic data. We're following the money, we're following the maps, and believe it or not, we're even following the molecular structure of crude oil.
That's right. Because we are opening the case file on what we're calling the Venezuela pivot. And the key here is to treat this not as a political story, not something about, restoring democracy.
Which is what every headline says.
Every single one.
Yeah.
No, we're treating this as a forensic investigation into what might just be the largest and fastest asset seizure in modern history.
An asset seizure. So not a liberation, not a police action.
Not at all. It was a hostile takeover, pure and simple. And it was driven by two things that you never read about in the press releases. The cold, hard mechanics of the petrodollar and, as you said, the industrial chemistry of a very specific type of oil.
That's the part that I find so fascinating. The public gets this really clean, simple narrative, right? A dictator is on his way out, human rights are being restored, and democracy is back on the menu. It feels good. It feels morally right.
It's designed to feel that way. It's a wrapper. It's a very effective public relations wrapper that covers up the real prize, a prize that's, well, financial, strategic, and industrial all at once.
So let's look under that wrapper. What is the fundamental inventory here? When you look at the map, what's actually at stake?
300 billion barrels of proven oil reserves.
Right.
That's the number, 300 billion. And that's sitting mostly in a region called the Orinoco Belt.
And just for context, how big is that really?
It is, by every accepted geological survey, the largest single proven reserve of oil on the planet, larger than Saudi Arabia's. That single fact, that number, it dwarfs any other political consideration. It's the truth on the map.
Okay. So let's set our mission for this deep dive. We're taking the cynical view, the realpolitik view. We are treating this 300 billion barrel prize as the target of a hostile takeover. So what was the threat? What made this move so urgent? Because this didn't just happen overnight.
No, this was brewing for years. And the existential threat, the one that forced the move, was what sources call the slow drift toward Beijing. For the better part of a decade, that colossal energy reserve was slowly but very surely moving out of the U.S. dollar's orbit and into China's sphere of influence.
And we're not just talking about China buying some oil.
Oh, no. It was far deeper than that. China had already become South America's #1 trading partner. They were building ports. They were financing railways, digital networks, all the critical infrastructure. They weren't just trading. They were integrating. The plan was to wire Venezuela's energy sector directly into Beijing's long-term economic machine.
It sounds less like a trade deal and more like a resource consolidation plan.
That is the perfect way to put it. It was a long-term play for China to secure a massive, stable source of energy that wasn't dependent on, say, the politics of the Middle East or vulnerable shipping lanes.
Right.
So from Washington's perspective, you're not just losing out on a trade deal. You're watching your primary global rival consolidate the planet's biggest energy prize right on your doorstep. It undermines the security of the entire Western Hemisphere.
So the verdict, based on the sources we've analyzed, it's pretty stark. This intervention wasn't about saving people. It was a preemptive strike.
A strategic one. It was about securing a physical supply line that is absolutely critical and, just as importantly, locking the Western Hemisphere's energy vault before a major global conflict could kick off.
And that's the key for you listening. If you can really get your head around the why, the deep mechanics of this whole thing, the currency, the chemistry, you can start to see where the smart money is moving next.
Exactly. So we're going to ignore the noise. We're going to drill down into two core mechanisms that force this. First, the incredible pressure of the petrodollar system.
And second, the almost hidden industrial need for this very specific type of Venezuelan heavy crude.
Let's start with the currency. This is where it all gets really interesting. We're calling this Section 1, the petrodollar pressure cooker.
Because this wasn't just a takeover. Our sources suggest it was more like a margin call on the entire U.S.-led global financial system.
That's the argument. And to really understand it, you have to step back and ask, what is the true source of American global power? It isn't just the aircraft carriers.
No.
It's the financial system that pays for those carriers. And the heart of that system is the petrodollar. This was a deal struck back in 1974 after Bretton Woods collapsed. The deal was simple. The world's most important commodity, oil, would be priced and sold exclusively in U.S. dollars.
It's been called the ultimate financial cheat code.
It really is. I mean, think about how it works. Every single country, Japan, Germany, South Korea, Brazil, they all need oil to power their economies. To buy that oil, what do they need first?
U.S. dollars.
U.S. dollars. And how do you get your hands on billions of dollars if you're, say, Japan? You sell goods to the U.S. or, and this is the critical part, you buy U.S. government debt. You buy treasury bonds.
So you're saying that by making oil trade in dollars, the U.S. basically creates a permanent captive market for its own debt.
A permanent, massive global market. Exactly. This endless demand for dollars, and by extension for U.S. treasuries, is what gives the U.S. what's called the exorbitant privilege.
Yeah.
It's what allows the government to run, just unthinkable deficits. What are we at now? $35 trillion in debt?
Something like that, yeah.
And the currency doesn't collapse. Inflation doesn't spiral out of control. Because the whole world has to keep buying our debt to buy their energy. The moment a big oil producer finds a way to get around that system, that's when the pressure cooker starts to whistle.
And we've seen the system starting to crack around the edges, haven't we? I mean, you hear about the BRICS nations, you hear about Saudi Arabia making noises about selling oil to China for yuan.
Yes, those are external threats. They're serious, but they can be managed, they can be negotiated. What made the Venezuela situation so different, so much more dangerous?
The location.
The location. It was happening in America's backyard. An external threat is one thing. A systemic existential threat that's consolidating just 1,000 miles from the Texas coast. That is a 5-alarm fire.
So what was the tripwire? What was the specific intelligence that came across the desk in Washington that turned this from a problem into an immediate crisis? The Maduro red line, as our sources called it.
The intelligence pointed to a plan for a full, non-reversible decoupling from the dollar. Maduro's government, with China's full technical and financial backing, was in the final stages of a plan to move its entire energy sector onto China's CIPS payment system.
CIPS, let's break that down because most people have heard of SWIFT, but CIPS is different.
It's very different. SWIFT is basically a messaging system. It sends payment instructions, but the actual money, the dollars, usually still has to move through correspondent banks in New York. CIPS is designed to do the whole thing. It's an alternative financial pipeline. It handles the messaging and the final settlement directly in Chinese Yuan or another currency.
Yeah.
So if Venezuela moves to CIPS, it's not just sending a message about an oil shipment. The actual payment for that oil, the billions of dollars, would happen completely outside the U.S. system.
So this wasn't about a few barter deals. This was about building a permanent, institutional, non-dollar highway for the world's biggest oil reserve.
That's it. And the plan wasn't even just to use the yuan. It was to price Venezuela's 300 billion barrels in a whole basket of currencies, with the yuan at its center. In effect, they were about to create a petroleum anchor right here in the Western Hemisphere.
That sounds like a torpedo.
It was a direct torpedo aimed right at the hull of the U.S. Treasury market. Just think it through. If China, the biggest energy importer in the world, can suddenly buy oil from the world's biggest reserve without needing a single U.S. dollar,
then they don't need to buy U.S. debt anymore.
They don't need our treasuries. And if they stop buying, who else starts to think maybe they don't need them either? The global demand for the dollar doesn't just get weaker, it could evaporate very, very quickly.
And what happens then if that demand evaporates?
Financial catastrophe. The dollar's value plummets under the weight of that $35 trillion debt. Interest rates would have to skyrocket to attract buyers. It would mean the end of the exorbitant privilege. The U.S. loses the economic power that underpins its entire global military and political posture.
Wow. So when you look at it that way, the conclusion is, well, it's pretty cold-blooded.
It is. The conclusion is that Washington could not, under any circumstance, tolerate a petroleum anchor in its own hemisphere.
Yeah.
The speed, the intensity of the intervention, it was a preemptive strike to prevent currency destabilization. It was a margin call on the entire petrodollar system, and it was executed with geopolitical force, not with mankers.
It's stunning, the idea that the financial stability of the U.S. was weighed against the fate of Venezuela, and the choice was clear.
The strategic logic was inescapable. And what's even more amazing is that this isn't even the whole story. The financial pressure was immense, but there was another driver, something much more physical, something that gets down to the actual molecules of the oil itself.
Which takes us right to our second section, Section 2. The industrial chemistry of conflict. And the argument here is that beyond the high finance, this was also about a very specific, very gritty industrial need, that the U.S. energy system literally requires Venezuelan oil to function properly.
That's right. And it's because we have this idea that oil is oil. A barrel is a barrel, but that's not true at all. It's like saying all wine is the same. It isn't.
So let's compare the two types here. First, what are we producing here in the U.S. with the whole shale revolution?
Okay, so the shale boom, from places like the Permian Basin in Texas, it produces what's called light sweet crude. Sweet because it has very little sulfur, which is a corrosive pollutant. Light because it has a high API gravity, which just means it's not very dense. It flows easily. It's the good stuff. It's easy
Yeah.
to refine. It's the champagne of crude oil.
Champagne. Okay, so what about those 300 billion barrels in the Orinoco Belt? What are they?
The complete opposite. That is heavy sour crude. It's heavy because it has a very low API gravity. It's thick, it's viscous. It's basically sludge. Some of it is so thick you practically have to mine it like tar. And it's sour because it has a ton of sulfur in it, which makes it very corrosive and complicated to process.
So wait a minute. Here's the question that doesn't make sense. If the U.S. is swimming in its own high-quality, easy-to-refine champagne crude, why on earth would we need this difficult, expensive, corrosive sludge from Venezuela? Why not just use our own stuff?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question. And the answer goes back to decisions made in the 1990s. Back then, before the shale boom, Venezuelan heavy crude was cheap, it was plentiful, and it was right next door,
The most reliable supplier.
by far. So the major U.S. refineries, especially the massive, complex ones along the Gulf Coast in Texas, Louisiana, they were physically built and optimized to run on that specific Venezuelan feedstock.
So they're literally built to eat sludge.
They're built to eat sludge because for decades, sludge was the most profitable thing for them to eat. To handle that stuff, you need incredibly specialized, expensive equipment. The two key pieces of kit are called cokers and hydrotreaters.
Oh, what do they do?
A coker is basically a giant pressure cooker. It uses extreme heat to crack the long, heavy, tar-like molecules into smaller, more valuable things like gasoline and diesel, and it leaves behind a solid residue called petroleum coke. A hydrotreater then uses hydrogen gas to pull all that nasty sulfur out to meet environmental rules. These are not simple machines.
And what happens if you take a refinery that's designed for heavy sour sludge and you try to pour in our nice, light, sweet champagne crude?
It's incredibly inefficient, that massive, expensive coker unit. It basically sits there idling. The light crude doesn't have the heavy gunk that the coker is designed to break down. You can't just flip a switch. It's like trying to run a diesel truck on jet fuel. The engine might turn over, but it's not going to run right, and you'll probably destroy it.
So the whole system is vertically integrated, and if the refineries can't run efficiently, the whole profit margin collapses.
Precisely. So let's look at what happened during the sanctions, that 5-year starvation period when Venezuelan oil was cut off. Those Gulf Coast refiners were in a terrible spot.
What were their options?
They had 3 bad ones. Option 1, just run their plants at a fraction of their capacity, which kills your profits. Option 2, go out and buy expensive heavy crude from somewhere else, like Canada or the Middle East, but then your shipping and pipeline costs go through the roof.
Right. It erases the whole cheap feedstock advantage.
Completely. And option 3 was to try and blend different types of crude to mimic the Venezuelan stuff, which is complicated, expensive, and still doesn't let the equipment run at peak efficiency.
So this was a major drag on the entire U.S. energy sector's profitability.
It was a structural vulnerability in the supply chain. The system physically needs that heavy sour crude to hit its maximum output and its best margins. So the intervention, from this perspective, wasn't about politics. It was about solving a fundamental industrial chemistry problem that was costing U.S. companies billions of dollars.
And when you look at who benefits immediately from this pivot, it seems to confirm that view.
It absolutely does. The smart money play here is a direct bet on reconnecting that supply chain. You look at the big U.S. refiners companies like Valero, ticker VLO, or Phillips 66, PSX.
Their whole business model just got a massive shot in the arm.
A structural one. Their feedstock is about to get much cheaper and much more reliable because the exact stuff they were built to process is flowing back to the Gulf. The supply chain has been fixed. And that was driven by the physics of molecules, not the speeches of politicians.
Okay, so we have the financial motive, save a petrodollar. We have the industrial motive, feed the refineries. Now let's zoom out again, because this whole thing isn't just about today's profits. It's about setting the board for a future conflict. Which brings us to Section 3, Fortress America's pre-war positioning.
This is where we have to connect this one specific event to the huge overarching shift in U.S. military strategy. For the last 20 years, the focus was counterinsurgency, the war on terror.
Right. Afghanistan, Iraq.
That's over. The new doctrine, the one that defines everything now, is called Great Power Competition, or GPC. And that is laser-focused on preparing for a potential conflict with a near-peer rival. And let's be blunt, that means China, probably over Taiwan.
And if you're planning for a clash of empires, the first thing you have to do is make sure your own backyard is completely secure, your strategic rear.
100%. And securing the rear means solving the supply line problem. In a war in the Pacific, think about the logistics. U.S. supply lines across that vast ocean would be attacked, they'd be severed, it would be a nightmare. But even more important is where our energy comes from.
We can't rely on the Middle East anymore.
In that scenario, absolutely not. Think about the journey. Most of that oil has to pass through two choke points. First, the Strait of Hormuz, which is already tense. But then it has to go through the Strait of Malacca, near Singapore.
Which China's Navy could easily contest.
They could shut it down. They could blockade it and cut off a huge percentage of the world's energy supply, just like that. You cannot fight a war in Asia if your primary energy supply line runs through Asia. The risk is just too high.
So the only solution is to have complete energy independence, total resource security, locked down inside your own hemisphere.
That is the doctrine of Fortress Americas. You create a self-sufficient, consolidated resource block that is, as much as possible, invulnerable to an external attack. And in that fortress, Venezuela and its 300 billion barrels. It's not just a nice-to-have, it's the cornerstone.
It's the strategic energy reserve for the entire fortress.
Exactly. Seizing control of it ensures that no matter what happens in the Pacific, no matter what happens in the Middle East, the American industrial war machine can keep running on guaranteed nearby energy.
And Venezuela is the biggest piece of this, but it's not the only piece. Once you start looking for this pattern, you see it elsewhere, don't you?
You see it everywhere. The doctrine demands consolidation of the whole hemisphere. Look at the quiet but intense pressure on Canada, not just for its oil, which is also heavy and sour, by the way, but for its vast mineral resources that are critical for defense technology.
The debate over things like the Keystone XL pipeline, it was never really just about the environment, was it?
It was about securing a guaranteed north-south flow of resources, making sure that Canadian energy and minerals flow south into the U.S. industrial base, not west across the Pacific to China, which would love to get his hands on them.
Okay, so Canada. Where else?
Look at the sudden increase in strategic talk about Greenland. Why Greenland? Because it has a massive untapped store of rare earth elements.
Which you need for everything, from guided missiles to stealth fighters.
Everything. So the U.S. ramps up its diplomatic presence, it reinforces its airbase at Thule, and it makes it very clear that Chinese investment in Greenland's mining sector is not welcome. It's about denying those resources to a rival and securing them for the fortress.
So the U.S. isn't just looking for allies anymore, it's demanding something more, like strategic dependence. Or, maybe to put it more bluntly, it's treating its neighbors as vassals.
That is the cold logic of this geopolitical seizure. It's about ensuring your neighbors are, first and foremost, reliable resource depots. You deny China any strategic depth, any political influence, any economic foothold in the Americas, you are locking down the hemisphere.
So when you filter the Venezuela move through that Fortress Americas lens, the objective becomes incredibly simple.
It becomes crystal clear. It's about which way the oil flows.
Mm-hmm.
If major war comes, that Venezuelan heavy crude must flow north to the refineries in Texas. It absolutely, positively cannot be allowed to flow west to Shanghai. So what we've witnessed under all the diplomatic cover is pre-war positioning. It's securing the energy you need to fight and win a global conflict.
It's just amazing how these three different motives, the petrodollar defense, the industrial chemistry, and the pre-war strategy, all converge on this one single action.
They align perfectly.
But that raises the next huge question. When you pull off a heist of this size, and a big chunk of the stolen goods effectively belongs to your main rival, how does that rival respond? Which takes us to Section 4, the China trap analyzing the retaliation risk.
And this is where the game gets really dangerous. This action has created enormous friction. And the basis of that friction, according to our sources, is financial. China had invested, or loaned, roughly $60 billion to Venezuela over the years.
$60 billion.
With a B. And it was a classic loans for oil deal. The debt was supposed to be paid back with decades of guaranteed oil shipments to China.
A deal that secured their long-term energy supply.
Exactly. But now, the U.S. controls the oil spigot, which means China is suddenly left holding, well, a $60 billion bag of bad debt. That entire investment is now effectively worthless, depending on how things shake out.
So for Beijing, this is a massive financial loss and a huge public humiliation. they've been outmaneuvered.
They've been completely outmaneuvered.
Yeah.
And their response can't be a conventional war, not over this. So they're likely to turn to what military strategists call asymmetric economic warfare. They'll hit the U.S. where it's vulnerable, using unconventional tools.
Okay, let's game this out. What are the main retaliation options on the table for China? Let's start with the most direct one. Option 1, financial dumping.
This one leverages America's greatest vulnerability, its own debt. China is still one of the largest foreign holders of U.S. Treasury bonds. They could decide to rapidly sell or dump a huge chunk of those bonds on the open market.
And what would that do? What's the impact?
It would cause chaos in the bond market. A flood of supply would crash the price of U.S. Treasuries. And when the price goes down, the interest rate the U.S. government has to pay on its debt goes way up.
So it makes it more expensive for the U.S. to borrow money.
Instantly and dramatically more expensive. It would destabilize everything. Mortgage rates, corporate borrowing. It would be a direct, painful punishment inflicted on the U.S. economy. It's turning America's own financial strength into a weapon against it.
But that's a risky move for China, too, isn't it? I mean, dumping bonds would devalue the rest of their own holdings. It's a bit like setting your own house on fire to spite your neighbor.
It is. It's the nuclear option, financially speaking.
Yeah.
Which is why they might look at option 2, military blockade, a strategic escalation.
Focused on Taiwan.
Focus on Taiwan. We've already established that's the central flashpoint for a great power competition. So, having been strategically embarrassed in its own hemisphere, China could respond by dramatically escalating tensions there. Maybe not a full invasion, but a large-scale military blockade.
Forcing the U.S. to make an impossible choice.
A terrible choice. Do you intervene and risk a full-blown war with China, the very war that the Fortress America strategy is meant to prepare for? Or do you stand down and effectively cede control of Taiwan, the heart of the global semiconductor industry? It's a way of imposing a massive global cost for the regional gain the U.S. made in Venezuela.
Okay, and then there's a third option, something more subtle, maybe more insidious.
Option 3, local insurgency. China has a very strong incentive to make sure the U.S. doesn't actually benefit from this oil prize. So they could discreetly fund, arm, and advise proxy groups or insurgents within Venezuela.
And the goal isn't to win a war.
No, the goal is just to cause chaos. Keep the oil fields offline, you fund sabotage operations, hit the pipelines, the pumping stations, the export terminals. You make the whole situation so unstable and dangerous that the oil can't flow reliably.
You turn the asset into a liability.
Precisely. You make the reconstruction effort so expensive and so politically toxic for the U.S. that they can't get the prize they came for. Denying the benefit to your enemy is just as good as securing it for yourself. You bog them down in a costly quagmire.
So the fact that Washington went ahead with this, knowing these were the possible responses, it implies they're making a huge strategic gamble.
A massive one. The bet is that China is currently too weak or too distracted by its own internal problems to retaliate effectively on any of those fronts.
And they do have internal problems.
Huge ones. A collapsing real estate market, mountains of local government debt, a demographic crisis. The U.S. is betting that Xi Jinping needs internal stability right now far more than he needs to get revenge for Venezuela. They're betting on a window of opportunity, a period of Chinese weakness.
Which means the real indicator, the place the smart money has to be watching, is the Chinese financial system itself.
It's the canary in the global coal mine. You have to watch the Chinese bond market, watch for corporate defaults, watch the health of their state-owned banks. If Beijing is forced to officially write off the $60 billion of Venezuelan debt, the shockwave could reveal just how fragile their system really is.
So this is high-stakes 4D chess played with sovereign debt and oil tankers.
The highest stakes. And the outcome will either cement U.S. dominance for another generation or trigger the next global economic shock. It all depends on China's next move.
That brings us to the final analysis. We've laid out the facts. This was a resource heist driven by the petrodollar, by industrial chemistry, and by pre-war strategy. So Section 5, the verdict and the reconstruction playbook. What's the final verdict on the era we're in, and where does the money go now?
The verdict is clear. We are in a new era. The age of pure free market globalization is over. The United States has just demonstrated very publicly that when it comes to energy security, there is no free market. It's a national security imperative.
So we're moving from an era of efficiency to an era of resilience and control.
An era of what we're calling imperial resources. If the state needs a resource to survive, the state will take it. And that completely changes how you have to think about investing.
So the first step in the playbook is what not to do?
Yes. First, risk management. Stay away from Venezuelan government bonds. They're politically radioactive and will be tied up in lawsuits for a decade. And obviously, don't touch the currency. It's worthless. The risk is astronomical and not worth the potential reward.
So we need to follow the money that has to flow into the reconstruction and the security of this new asset. Let's break down the 3 reconstruction plays for the smart money. What's play number 1?
Plan number 1 is the oil services majors. The source material is unanimous on this. After years of sanctions and neglect, Venezuela's entire oil infrastructure is, and I quote, rusted and broken. The wells, the pipelines, the terminals, it's all falling apart.
And getting that 300 billion barrel reserve flowing again is going to cost a fortune.
A colossal fortune. The low-end estimate is $50 billion just for the initial repairs and upgrades to get production back to a reasonable level.
Yeah.
And that money is not going to local companies.
No, it's going to go to the big U.S. players who have the technology and, critically, have the political green light from Washington.
Of course. So you look at the giants of the industry. You look at Halliburton. You look at Schlumberger, which now goes by the ticker SLB. They are the ones who will get the no-bid contracts to come in and fix everything. They provide the drilling tech, the pressure management, the pipeline reconstruction. It's a guaranteed fire hose of capital aimed directly at them.
Okay, that's the operational trade. What's a play number 2? This one goes back to the chemistry argument.
Play number 2 is the U.S. refiners. This is the most direct margin play. As we established, companies like Valero and Phillips 66 were physically built to process this exact type of cheap, heavy, sour crude.
So their biggest input cost is about to drop significantly.
Precisely. The cheap feedstock is coming back, right to their doorstep on the Gulf Coast. Their input costs go down, but the price they get for the gasoline and diesel they sell will stay high, tied to the global market.
It's a guaranteed expansion of their profit margins. It's baked into the physics of the situation.
It's an investment in an engineered industrial advantage. The moment that first tanker docks in Houston, their entire cost structure improves. It's not speculation, it's a reality of the supply chain.
All right, and that brings us to the third play, the geopolitical hedge. If you're building Fortress Americas for a future conflict, you need to be able to police it.
Which leads you straight to the defense contractors. The consolidation of the hemisphere and the ongoing security of this massive asset, especially with the risk of Chinese-backed insurgency, it all requires a continuous, high-level investment in military and surveillance technology.
This isn't a one-and-done deal. You have to enforce the new reality.
You have to. So that means more spending on maritime patrols in the Caribbean to protect the tanker routes. It means more investment in continental missile defense. It means advanced surveillance systems to monitor for foreign influence.
So companies that build those systems are in for a good decade.
You would think so. Companies like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, their order books are likely to grow, driven by the simple strategic need to enforce the borders of the fortress. The future belongs to the ones who control the resources and, crucially, the ones who build the fences and control the valves.
And that concludes our deep dive into the 300 billion barrel heist, a fascinating and deeply cynical investigation. Let's just quickly recap the 4 main points.
First, we saw this was a hostile takeover of a massive resource, not a humanitarian mission. 300 billion barrels was the prize.
Second, the trigger was an existential threat to the petrodollar. They had to stop Venezuela from anchoring its reserves to the Chinese yuan.
Third, it was an industrial necessity. U.S. Gulf Coast refineries physically require this heavy, sour crude to operate at peak profitability.
And fourth, this was a key move in the grand strategy of building Fortress Americas, securing the hemisphere's resources as pre-war positioning for a potential conflict with China. So now that we've laid out the cold, hard, real politic of it all, we have to face the ethical questions that this reality raises. And these are really questions for you, for everyone listening, to think about.
And the first question is a big one. Is it acceptable for a superpower to overthrow a government to secure resources that it deems essential for its own national security? Where do you draw the line between realism and idealism?
And then there's the much more personal question, the one that hits your wallet. If this intervention works and all that cheap, heavy crude means the price of gas drops by $1 a gallon, do you really care how it happened? Does the economic relief at the pump outweigh the geopolitical violence that made it possible?
We opened the file on this, and I think we confirmed that the pivot wasn't about politics. It was about physics, the chemistry of oil, and it was about finance, the architecture of the dollar.
So the final question, the one for you to take away and chew on, is this. Do you think this aggressive, preemptive maneuver actually works? Does it secure the U.S. energy grid for a generation? Or does this kind of blatant, high-stakes asset seizure just pour fuel on the fire and accelerate us toward the very great power conflict it was supposed to help us win? Does this prevent World War III, or does it start it?
Something to think about. Thanks for diving deep with us.
We'll see you next time.